Shūmon Katto Shu Dai 73 足 Engo Kamon Engo Gonzenji Soto Ikka naru kakore butsu Shi iwaku Kuchi wa kore kamon. Entangling Vines, Case 73. Engo's Gate of Misfortune. A monk asked Engo Kokugon, "What is Buddha?" Engo replied, "The mouth is the gate of misfortune." Today is the third day of our 2024 Hō-On Sesshin, commemorating 10 years of Jōshū Roshi having transformed from this way of being that we knew for many, many years into a different way of being that does not easily conform to our ideas of what should be or what should not be. That is not graspable in the way that we usually grasp things that are easily put into categories, that are easily cut into neat pieces and put into neat boxes. And so it is with many of the things that we encounter here in Zen practice. While we grow up, and when we grow up, we develop those skills that we human beings have that allow us to neatly put things into cubbies, into little holes, into little containers, and sometimes lock all the things we don't like in a closet with lock and key, hoping to never encounter them. But as we know through our practice, there's really nothing that we can lock away. Nothing is hidden. Everything is so obvious. Everything that exists is clear if we like it or not. This Dharma unfolds every moment without choice, without predilections, without avoidance. I'm quite sure you have encountered the Shinjin Mei, faith in mind or unbelieving in mind, which is a treatise by the third ancestor of Zen in China, Sosan Kanchi Zenji. And it begins with the words, "The highest path is not difficult. It is just beyond picking and choosing." It goes on for a long time, and I encourage you to read it because it is very instructive in looking at non-duality, in learning about what is meant, beginning with this very first sentence. Beyond picking and choosing. In the beginning, when we encounter such expressions, as the Shinjin-mei, on believing in mind. Of course, there's no other way for us to look at it than from the point of view of a separated self, of a separated individuality. The idea of I am this, I am that, in a fashion that is fixated. These very basic teachings that I am speaking about now, of course, I have learned from Jōshū Roshi's presentation of explaining his understanding of the Dharma activity, expressing his experience of living and embodying that activity. And there are many very important teachings in here that we might not find in an explicit way like that in the classical Zen literature. On the other hand, as I just pointed out, should you look at Sosan Ganchi Senji's Shinjin-mei on believing in mind, it is very condensed teaching there. Very, very straightforward, not taking any metaphors, not at least more than is necessary. And then when we follow Zen history in the Tang dynasty, in the Song dynasty, and so on, then we see that the teaching of Zen, of Chan, starts to intermingle with the Chinese traditions, literary traditions, very specific usage of words, of images, of imagery, of metaphors, and so on. So much that it is sometimes quite difficult for us to gain a deeper and deeper understanding and see those nuances, especially in those koan collections that we find employed here in the Rinzai school. Jōshū Roshi turned it around again in his teaching while he was using texts from the classical repertoire, so to speak, of what Zen Teishō is based upon or uses. He still went back to almost the way that Sosan Kanchi Zenji did it and spoke very plainly often, expounding his teaching of the Dharma activity, the Nyorai Nyoko Zen, Tathagata Zen, which is different. We have to be careful because in the classical Rinzai tradition, we speak about two kinds of Zen. One is Soshi Zen, which is the ancestral Zen, and Tathagata Zen, which is the Zen that is based upon the interpretation and the manifestation of the teachings of the Tathagata, who of course was Shakyamuni Buddha. Jōshū Roshi's Tathagata Zen, as we know it, is Nyoko Nyorai Zen, or maybe Nyorai Nyoko Zen, whichever direction you want to go, and not to actually argue about which one came first. Thus come, thus gone, or thus gone, thus come. The activity of Dharma, Dharma no Hataraki, and the teaching that we received about the two mutually opposing phases or manifestations of that Dharma activity, of expansion and contraction, of plus and minus. And during Roshi's time, it was very straightforward to say male and female. That has changed a bit in our modern times and moved from the binary to the non-binary, which of course is a very welcome augmentation and coming closer to what really is, not to polar opposites in a clearly defined duality, but the spectrum of any place within and any place outside of these polar opposites as they were defined. So when I think about the Dharma activity, and when I came to Daibosatsu Zendo, which is basically a cousin lineage to the lineage that Jōshū Roshi represented, things were very, very similar, but at the same time, they were very different. So just speaking about Tathagata Zen there is a different undertaking than connecting with Jōshū Roshi's disciples and what follows after. And I also, of course, have to acknowledge we have new generations of practitioners here who never heard any Teishō about Tathagata Zen and the Dharma activity. And if you are really brave, you pick up about Tathagata Zen, or you pick up Manifesting Zen, the books, and try to read it. And I can understand that after a few pages, your head might hurt. And for that reason, we are gathering here in a Hō-On Sesshin and in Sesshin in general, so that we don't take the approach from the outside in, which is taking in the words and the expressions of our predecessors, of our teachers, of the ancient masters, and trying to use them to penetrate to an insight. But here we are sitting in Zazen very plainly, shining that light that I spoke about in the Teishō 2 days ago, this Attadipa, you are the light, that light of the all-pervading Buddha nature, to shine that on our very experience, on our very being as we are in this moment. And as we do this for a year, for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, no matter how long, it is a process of unfolding of this very first-hand experience of what is expressed in all of these teachings. Jōshū Roshi's teaching, the teaching of Sosanganchi Senji, and all those formulations. And when they start to illuminate from the inside out, it is quite a different thing, quite a different becoming alive of those words that without it just seem like somewhat alive, but not a lived experience. So koans, when we study koans and so on, they are just meant to help us illuminate these aspects from the inside out and fill it with the light that we carry in our own center of gravity. So, the Dharma activity, with its two opposing manifestations, is something that has one property that often is not talked about, but that Jōshū Roshi also spoke about quite a lot. He said, Ishi yokyu nashi. Without will and desire, this activity of Dharma functions. It functions without will and desire. And that goes right back to that first line of the Shinjin Mei. Without picking and choosing, the Dharma activity works. It has no likes, it has no dislikes. It is an activity that is a natural activity like gravity. Gravity. Gravity just works. The fan falls, just falls, not because there is somebody sitting in the middle of this planet saying, I want to have this fan. And neither is there somebody sitting in the middle of the earth saying, no, I don't want that. It's just happening, happening, happening without any discrimination, without will and without desire. And understanding the Dharma activity and everything that unfolds in our lives in that same way as a natural unfolding of a natural activity that takes away any kind of intention, meaning, or even a target, makes a completely different outlook on interacting and relating to this activity. I can only speak for this practitioner sitting here in front of this camera. And all I can say is, for me, once I understood that, it provided a deep, deep sense of relief, relief and comfort, relief and comfort and trust in this Dharma activity. Because I realized that if something terrible happens to me, then it just happened. It just happens. It's not because I am a bad person. It's not because I am targeted with some kind of bad intention or anything like that. Oh, it just happened. And that makes it much easier to relate to. In the same way, if something wonderful happens, it's not because I am so special or some kind of divine place is putting any kind of special emphasis on making me happy. No, it just happens. It just happens, and we relate to it, of course, with gratitude. We relate to the pain with the appropriate kind of emotional response and action, but it is not focused on providing or taking away anything from this person. That's a quite interesting approach to it. And since I started speaking about gravity, let me say, gravity is also a wonderful force that we can use to explain what, in the context of Zen practice, this great faith means. Great faith, the great root of faith, Dai Shinkan, which is one of the three pillars of Zen practice. It is the same faith, the faith that we have when we get up in the morning. This morning, before you got out of bed, you didn't think, should I get up? Do I have to be concerned that when I get up, Mother Earth will not keep me on her surface anymore? Gravity will not work anymore. I might just be flung off this planet into outer space. I don't think anyone does that in the morning. We get out of bed. We stand up. We make relationship with that gravity, and we have complete trust and faith in it. And similarly, as we have learned to live within that gravity with our body and have learned very complex ways of locomotion, that is just a controlled kind of falling that we call walking, to work with this activity, not just by following it 100%, but by having that appropriate relationship that keeps us upright, that allows us to walk through life, that allows us to sit in the Zendo. All of this is a very nice way of relating to the Dharma activity as well. It might pull in one direction. There are these centrifugal forces and all kinds of forces, but we can relate to them and we can develop the way in that relationship to act according to the circumstances and the conditions. So this is my introduction to this very short koan that we have today. Yeah, case 73 of the Shumon Kattoshu. In the traditional way of treating a case from a collection of koans, we always pay respects to the dramatis personae, so the people who appear in this koan. In this koan, it is one named person and one unnamed person. The named person, you will also have noticed that today we chanted the Daihishu, the Great Compassionate Dharani, and then Ino-san, after that, chanted an echo, a dedication. And in that dedication, there was Engo Kokugon Zenzu Daiosho. That is the person who appears in this koan. So Engo Kokugon was born in Sichuan in the year 1063. His family was well educated in Confucianism. And that's an interesting thing to note. It also would mean that probably his family was part of the Chinese civil service. The civil service in that time contained a lot of poetry, arts, and a very rich literary culture as well. Engo Kokugon. And his surname was Luo. He was quite a prodigal child. Apparently, while he was young, he was able to memorize a text of 1,000 kanji, of 1,000 characters in a single day without making any mistake, reading it back from his mind. And Confucianism was in China for much, much longer than Buddhism. Often we are not aware of the fact that the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, or Siddhartha, who turned into Shakyamuni Buddha, lived about the same time as Confucius. So when Buddhism came to China in the 6th, 7th, 8th, and so on, developing centuries, already there had been almost 1,000 years of practice of this teaching of Confucius. So in such a family, Engo Kokugon was born, showing promise for being able to memorize all the texts. And we can see in the development into a Zen practitioner that this was an important part of Engo's way of approaching this teaching of Chan. So he went and learned about Buddhism, not necessarily to the delight of his family, but so it was. Many of the Confucian Illuminati, so to speak, became interested in Buddhism and started usually studying first the scripture. Of course, that would be the one thing that is as close to the Confucian Analects and all the lectures that we have. So taking up this practice of meditation that he learned, Engo read several Buddhist texts, became a monk, devoted himself to the study until a serious illness made him aware in a very different way than reading the texts what it means to encounter the problem of samsara, the problem of not looking at it from the point of view of doctrine, of learning, of studying scripture, but from the point of view of being the object of it, of being mangled by engi, by this patitya samutpada, by this chain of origination, and really suffering. So he went on a long pilgrimage, and it took him to a number of teachers. Most of the teachers already sanctioned his understanding because he was very, very scholarly, could answer all the questions. But then he came to this teacher by the name of Goso Hō-En. Goso Hō-En, Goso means the fifth ancestor, but this is not the fifth ancestor. It's just the person who presided over the mountain, the temple where the fifth ancestor used to be. So Goso Hō-En. And Goso Hō-En would not acknowledge his understanding. And it made Engo mad. He left in anger. And as he was leaving in anger, Goso called out after him, "Remember me when you are ill." Soon afterwards, while at another temple, Engo fell sick. And taking that as a sign, he returned to Goso Hō-En and remained with him until he became his Dharma successor. In his life, further illness came when his mother became ill. In 1102, he returned home to care for his ill mother. And the local prefect, knowing of his family and knowing of his achievement, invited him to meet other officials and to reside at a specific temple. By then, this Engo started to talk about a collection of poems and of old cases that he had learned from Seicho Juken that was collected before. And he started to lecture on 100 old cases and verses to the cases. And you might remember that with Engo's annotations and added pointers and verses, we know this nowadays as the Blue Cliff Record, the Hikigan-roku. The Hikigan-roku gives clear instructions how to approach koans in the understanding at that time. And Engo, as a literary scholar, of course, went so far as to annotate every line by line of the poems that Seicho Juken had appended. And if you were a scholar, you would know that it's very complex in terms of the literary tradition that we have in China at that time. Through his lectures and through writing this and compiling the Blue Cliff Record, Engo became very popular. And one of his students is Daiei Soko. Daiei Soko is another Zen master in history that is very well known because he developed a different approach to koan practice that is called Watto. So the word head, where the koan is reduced to a very specific let's say, seminal portion of it. And that is what the Zazen, the meditation, and the inquiry into the koan focuses on. And of course, we know that Daisoko was not happy with the Blue Cliff record at all. What did he do? He collected as many copies as he could. He took from the printers the woodcut, because everything was woodcut in terms of reproduction. And those were the master stamps. And what did he do with them? He burned it all. He burned it all. Seicho Juken's work, Engo Kokugon's work. But, of course, there were some prints that survived, and that's why we have the Blue Cliff record nowadays. When you look at the lineages from the Chinese Rinzai tradition going to China, of course, all living Japanese and descending Rinzai Roshis have Engo Kokugon in their lineage as one of the ancestors in China. So this is a little bit about the person Engo Kokugon. All of this is in a sort of encyclopedia, a collection of the history of all the great masters that was written in the 12th century. And it's called the Keito Dento Roku, the record of the transmission of the lamp. And we who have to speak about these masters, we always honor them by recounting what their life was like, even if we don't really know if it's historically completely accurate. If it serves the teaching and the passing on, and if it teaches us to pay respects, that is a wonderful thing to learn. Now, the second person in this koan is a monk. A monk. This no-name monk appears in many, many koans. It usually goes, a monk asked so-and-so. And in this case, a monk asked Engo Kokugon, what is Buddha? What is Buddha? That is quite an interesting question. One interesting way to look at the questioner here is to try to investigate or to imagine, was this monk somebody who was testing the master? Or was he a curious person who had not yet come to a clear manifestation and realization of what he's asking for? What is Buddha? But be that as it may, let's look at the response that came from Engo. Engo replied, the mouth is the gate of misfortune. Here begins the entanglement between the person, their history, and their individual, very specific expression of their Zen. Engo's Zen. The mouth is the gate of misfortune is a quote from a Confucian text. In one of the speeches of Confucius, this is what Confucius said. The mouth is the gate of misfortune. And here begins our looking at the various aspects of that koan. There's a question that is being asked. And the answer is, the mouth is the gate of misfortune. Is Engo telling the monk, you should not be asking about this? Or is there more behind that than just saying, do not speak? We always want to remember that when the Buddha awoke, when Siddhartha sat for 7 days under this tree, that on the 8th day with the morning star turned into the Bodhi tree, and Siddhartha turned into the awakened one, the Buddha. What did he teach after that? He did not say anything for quite a long time. And he did not say anything because he knew that words will not be able to fully express or lead anyone else to that realization that he had so diligently attended to over those 8 days and over the many years before. If you recall the case number 72, in which said Buddha appears, there he said, I have lived in this world of suffering for 49 years. So after he awoke, he lived for another 49 years in a world that he recognized as a world of suffering. So here's the important realization that awakening is not what many hope it would be, that everything will be fine from now on. It's wonderful. Everything is beautiful. It is more like, as I have said in many talks, it's more like sitting in a dark room and the light comes on. And suddenly we can see, but there is no guarantee that we will like what we see. In one corner, there's the dirty laundry. And we realize, that's what I've been smelling in the dark for so many years, but now I see it. And then with seeing this, of course, we might see a beautiful flower as well. But all of it is there, and we have to attend to all of it. So for the Buddha, the question was, well, shall I just take care of that laundry now? But then seeing that there's a lot of suffering in the world everywhere, everywhere. It was really torturous for him to feel that he can't say anything. But after that, wisdom and the clarity of his awakening started to transform into compassion and into compassionate action for those who are still suffering. Then he began to speak. Then he began to preach, to speak about the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and so on. The mouth is the gate of misfortune. How does it relate here? Is it a misfortune that the Buddha finally went and spoke and put his teachings into words? There's a saying nowadays, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the possible. It's the same here. We know as soon as we open our mouth and say anything about anything, it's just about. It's just about. It's using tools that we have to use that are not sharp enough to actually completely express what we want to express, what we deeply know. Remember the Mumonkan in the preface where Mumon says, it is like you have seen something, but you are deaf mute and you cannot speak about it. This is exactly what made this wisdom of awakening transform into wisdom and compassion. And going with upaya, skillful means to help the suffering of all sentient beings. The mouth is the gate of misfortune, is not telling the monk who's asking, don't ask. It's more like a warning sign. Well, be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you express. One of the expressions of this that I quite often share with people who come to Doksan is the story about the two people standing in front of a wonderful work of art, a wonderful big painting. They're standing and are completely engrossed in the work. And finally, one of them says, oh, how beautiful. And turns to the other person who's standing there. And that other person is a Zen student. And the Zen student turns to the person and acknowledges them and says, yes, of course. But what a shame to say so. So when we sit in Zazen in the Zendo, when we do Kinhin and all of that, where there is no need to speak, let's be aware that our thoughts very often are speech and words, concepts, and hollow shells that do not contain the actual living experience of breath, of the pain in our legs, of the itch on our nose, the warmth of the sun during Kinhin, the faint breeze that might refresh us. Entering that realm where it is not intellection, but where it is experience and intuition is very, very important. Chokkan no sekai, the world of intuition, before it is put in concepts, words, and so on. So that's one of the ways to look at it. But the mouth is the gate of misfortune is not just in one direction. It's not only what comes out of the mouth, but let's also be careful that we consider what we put in it. The misfortune of greed, of the hungry ghosts. You all know the pretas, the hungry ghosts that have this big, big belly that needs to be filled, that needs to be satisfied, and their mouth is only as big as the opening a pin could poke into the skin of a fruit. The mouth also has two directions, not just expressing, but also taking in food, taking in sustenance, taking a kiss, all of it. In this Tathagata Zen practice, we have always to attend to both sides, both manifestations of this activity, not just plus or minus, not even speaking about plus and minus anymore, but just of the function of the activity of change from one to the next. So let's look at our greed when we have our meals, shukuza, breakfast, saiza, lunch, or even our medicinal meal, the yakuseki, in the evening. How does this mind connect and relate to it? Eating is such a wonderful teacher. Same, inhalation is a wonderful teacher, as is exhalation. Is there a greed to inhale? Well, if you affect your will on the exhalation and you hold your breath, you will feel that very, very strong need to inhale. And it will teach you what opposition to these natural activities creates. When you eat, be aware that with the eating, you are causing harm. All of our existence is such a gate of misfortune, because even the most benevolent person has to eat, has to breathe. And as we breathe in, if there's anything floating in the air, our cilia in our nasal passages might catch it. And then our immune system comes and takes care of it. It keeps us healthy. But ultimately, all existence is inherently harmful. What are you going to do about it? Is the question. What is Buddha? Engo replied, the mouth is the gate of misfortune. The place of going in and going out is the place of misfortune that cuts the indivisible into the idea of duality. But it's just an idea. It's just an idea. This life, this Buddha nature is indivisible. That's why our thinking in dualistic terms is called delusion. If we believe it without asking, like the monk asked, then it is delusion. If we use it as upaya in our daily lives to be able to connect in society, to be able to move this world forward to a better place where there is less pollution, where there is less misogyny, less racism, less sexism, or all of these ills of society, it's a good use of duality. But if it is just accepted without asking any questions, it is only misfortune and delusion. It's not an easy task to be able to embrace all of this. All is one, and still duality has its place. That's why we call it Zen practice. And I encourage you to use this time. And this time is any remaining moment of our lives to attend to this unfolding with an open heart, an open mind, with a pragmatic attitude of not discounting upaya where it belongs, but being clear where delusion begins and where clarity starts. So please Never, never stop practicing.